This is the PA Startup Podcast, episode number 11. This is the PA Startup Podcast, where we help pre-PA students, current PA students, and new grads start their careers as physician assistants. I'm your host, Chris Darst. We are glad you're here. Hey guys, welcome to episode 11 of the PA Startup Podcast. This is, episode number 1 of a 2-part series. I was going to do them together, but they ended up going a little bit long, and I know how you feel about long podcasts. Anything more than about 30, 40 minutes, I start to lose my focus, so I'm going to split this into 2. So this one is contracts, and the second one is negotiation, and it's a great, both are equally important. If you are in school or applying, you're like a pre-PA student, the contracts one might be a little bit boring for you, but you can sure listen to it if you want, but it'll be more essential as you get through your rotation year and then out looking for jobs and things. So definitely bookmark it if this doesn't apply to you now. But the negotiation one, which is going to be episode 12, that one is going to be important for anybody, because if you think about it, we negotiate all the time. It's not just for jobs. That's typically what we think, though, is I want to negotiate my salary, or I want to negotiate benefits, or I want to negotiate responsibilities. But if you think about it, I negotiate all the time. I negotiate with my kids. I negotiate with my wife. I negotiate with my employer, with my coworkers, with the nurses at work, even with patients. I negotiate with them on, what amount of pain medicine is appropriate. They want to be knocked out and sleeping, and I want them to be able to take deep breaths and get up and walk. So life is kind of a negotiation. So that episode will be essential for everybody. So don't skip that one. That episode is actually based on an Audible book, an audio book that I read called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, V-O-S-S. He was an FBI hostage negotiator. So it's kind of a cool story. He talks about all the times he's negotiated hostages and what he's learned from it. So hopefully we're not going to be negotiating at that level, but he's got a lot of really good teaching points for kind of the daily negotiating that we're doing, as well as with our jobs. So definitely check that out. We are now sponsored by audible.com. So you listeners of the PA Startup Podcast can go to pastartup.co/audible. And there is a free 30-day trial there that includes a free book. So if you sign up for the trial, now get this is legit, okay? I did this, loved it, and have stuck with it. But even if you cancel, you get to keep the book. But I went to it. I signed up for my free trial because I wanted to get a book called Shoe Dog, which is Phil Knight, the founder of Nike. It was his story. We were on a long car trip, and the kids are watching a movie. My wife's napping, so I was like, I need something to keep me awake. And podcasts were too broken up, so I said I need something long. So I downloaded that book with the free trial, and I thought I'll just cancel it. And it really is free. You can cancel it before 30 days. You never pay a penny, and you get to keep their free book. But what I found was, man, I love the audiobook. And so I thought, well, what other titles are there? So I went to their library, and I found there's hundreds of thousands of titles in there, all popular books and all books, every category you can think of. So I thought, okay, well, there's a couple more I'd like to listen to. So I'll keep this trial going. And the trial turns into a normal membership, which I think is $15 a month. And I thought, okay, I'll do it once or twice, and then I'll cancel it. But every month I seem to find a new title that I love. And I'm not the kind of guy that can sit down and just read a book. I'm a multitasker. I need to be mowing the lawn or on the treadmill or driving to work or going to pick my kids up at their sporting activities or something. So I rarely have time to sit down and read a book. And so this is a great way to kind of broaden my mind a little bit, learn about stuff that I want to learn about, whether it's Nike, Shoe Dog, or, there's a million books out there. So this one, the negotiating one, Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss, was one that I downloaded when we had some changes at work, and I'm not a very good negotiator. So I thought, okay, I'm going to check this out. I'm going to see what this has for me. And man, there were some good tips in there. So that'll be episode 12. I'm going to give you the highlights from that. But yeah, check out pastartup.co/audible. I get a couple bucks if you sign up for the free trial, even if you don't pay anything. It doesn't cost more for you down the road or anything, but they will send me a couple bucks for sending you there. That helps keep the podcast up and going. I would love it if you'd do that. Yeah, that'll be episode 12. So this is about contracts. We're going to jump in. Episode 12 is about negotiation. So let's get down to business here. So we're going to cover the nuts and bolts of contracts, and then also equally and maybe more common are offer letters, as well as the things that need to be included, good things to consider adding. All right, so here we go. Contracts versus offer letters. I've had some people ask, what's the difference between the two? So here's the short and sweet of it. A contract is like a detailed document, usually written by an attorney, that outlines the terms of the employment, the scope of your practice, what the termination guidelines are, like a confidentiality agreement. Oftentimes there's a non-compete clause, severability. There's all kinds of like legalese terms, but it really goes through and itemizes everything about your job. Now this can be good because it gives you a full list. It's often multiple pages. My very first job had a contract with it, and it was very complete. There were no surprises for sure on what was going to be expected of me, what my responsibilities were going to be, what the pay was going to be, stuff like that. Oftentimes the pay will be as part of an appendix because that's a little bit more fluid. It's going to go up as you have more experience and things like that. So they're very comprehensive. However, they can be a little restrictive because they're so comprehensive. So if there's a non-compete clause or there's a severability thing, that says, you got to give 60 days notice or 90 days notice or something like that, most places are looking for a PA to fill a spot in 30 to 45 days. So that might actually work against you. So definitely read it. You don't necessarily have to have an attorney look at it, but have someone that maybe has looked at contracts before. Maybe your uncle is in business and has read contracts and things, or another PA that might have a contract with their employer. That would be a great person to talk to because they're used to the kind of stuff that's in there. So now this is different than an offer letter. An offer letter is actually in where I practice is more common. The state that I work in is what's called a right to work state. So there aren't as many contracts. Offer letters are a little bit more fluid. They can terminate me if they want, really for anything, because there is no contract to protect me. So another vote for contracts is that there's very specific criteria on what would cause you to be let go. But an offer letter is basically a summary of like a previous conversation. So let's say I'm the office manager and you're in my office and we talk about salary and we talk about days off and we talk about stuff. The offer letter basically itemizes those sorts of things. So there's not as many details in it, which is good and bad. It's good because you're not locked into anything specific, but it's bad because there's a lot of gray area. So, when will your salary go up, and what happens if XYZ happens, or what happens if the surgeon or the physician leaves? Do you still have a job? Those sorts of things. That's kind of a little bit more gray. So this is what we would say, get it in writing, even if it's not in contract form, an offer letter that itemizes things. So starting salary, benefits, CME days, or CME budget. Where does your cell phone come from? Is it a stipend or is it paid for? Time off dates, how many days do you get off of work for vacation and sick leave? Oftentimes, cover letters too will include additional requirements like passing boards, getting hospital privileges, passing a drug test, things like that. All right, so when you're looking at either one of these things, there are a couple of things that have to be included, okay? Number one is going to be salary. So this isn't necessarily like a straight dollar number either. It might be an hourly wage, or it's a true salary. It's just one number that covers everything. But it should also include any bonus opportunities that you might have, after you see X number of patients. That could go, you could get 25% of the collections after that, or anything like that. You can also include in here additional call pay. So let's say you work your typical 32 hours a week or 36 hours a week or something like that. Can you cover call for somebody else and take, $60 a shift or something like that, as compensation for that? So that should be itemized if possible. Really, any source of income should be included in very clear terms, because that's one thing that gets people going, is if you mess with their salary or their compensation. If I think I'm getting, $60,000 for this plus $800 per weekend, and I don't get that, that's going to really kind of tick me off. So that needs to be very clear in writing. And don't be afraid to ask for clarification if it's not clear. Maybe there's a limit to the number of call pay or call hours that you can do, or the number of weekends you can pick up. That very well could be a problem. So definitely find out those details. Another thing that has to be included is your benefits, health insurance, disability. Is there any disability insurance offered? Health insurance is probably the biggest one. Unless you work for like a hospital group or something like that, there might not be disability, but definitely health insurance. Is it a stipend? My first job, they offered me $250 for me to go out and find an individual health insurance policy. I was able to negotiate that to be not just me, but my family, because I had 2 kids at the time. So my personal policy was $87 a month, but I knew I had up to $250. So I said, well, I tell you what, let me cover my family on that. That just makes sense. And they went for it. So is it a stipend, or is it provided by the practice? And what are the premiums, and what are all the ins and outs of that? So that's the biggest one that should be in there. But also, what about your continuing medical education fund? There should be some money there. And these really, honestly, guys, they range from $500 to $2,500, and even higher, I suppose. But this is money to go to conferences, to pay for Category 1 CMEs that you need to keep your license. So oftentimes, in addition to the budget of this, or like the money that you have to spend, is going to be a number of days that you can take per year. Typically, it's between 3 and 5 days a year, and this is so you can go to a conference that's out of town and have time to get there and attend the conference and get back. And these should not come out of your vacation days. So be sure that there are separate CME days or separate, medical education days that aren't part of your vacation. I would really fight that one, because nothing would stink more than being sick, or whatever, you're off work for vacation and things like that, and then find out that you don't have enough days to do what's required to keep your license. So, and I would go for, the budget's not a huge deal. If you're in family practice, if you're in something a little bit more mainstream, you can get these CME hours anywhere. I mean, you could be in dermatology and you could go to a cardiology conference and get the CMEs. It doesn't have to be specific to your specialty, but it is handy. I work in cardiothoracic surgery. There's not a lot of cardiothoracic conferences where I live, so I do have to travel, whether that's driving or flying, getting a hotel, attending the conference. So the higher that budget, the easier it is to do, but it shouldn't be a deal breaker, but it is one area that you could negotiate. Because, it's kind of nice to go to a nice place to get away. If it's wintertime and you're in the north, it's great to go to Florida or California or something in the middle of winter to get your hours. So another thing is your cell phone. Where does your cell phone come from? Do they give you a stipend to pay part of your bill? And that's pretty common. Or do they just cover your phone for you? And then if so, are there any restrictions on using it for personal use? Nowadays, with smartphones and things, it's kind of impossible to only have, work business stuff conducted on one phone. So I would say, either they pay for all of it, or they give you a fairly good sized stipend and you keep your own contract. And that way you can kind of pick what phone you have and things like that. So those are the things that have to be included: salary and benefits. Those are the 2 number 1 things that have to be in there. Some good additions to put into the offer letter. If you have to travel for your job, let's say you go to multiple hospitals or multiple sites, especially if you're traveling a long distance, mileage reimbursement. If you use, obviously only if you use your own car, but if you're driving your own car, you can negotiate mileage reimbursement. The IRS comes out with it's like 55 cents or 53 cents per mile. You keep track of your miles and you submit it and you get reimbursed. Now, this doesn't cover just gas, which it does definitely help for that, but it's usually more than that, because there's going to be some wear and tear on your car. I did some moonlighting that was about 150 miles away from my house, and I was doing that once a month for about a year. And I racked up the miles pretty quick, and I was getting this extra check every month in addition to, my stipend for going and covering up there. And I was like, hey, this is great. Like, this is way more than I paid in gas. But then what started to happen was my car needed new brakes, and my car needed, the rotors adjusted, and, I needed new tires. And, oh man, it started to add up. So I realized the importance of that, mileage reimbursement to cover gas and wear and tear on the car. So that's a good one if you're going to be commuting. And these are, the CME days, the cell phone, the mileage reimbursement. These are all great things to negotiate, especially if the salary isn't exactly what you want to be. Sometimes there's some wiggle room with these sorts of things that you can get the benefits of this without, the salary. If they're not budging on the salary, this is a good place to go. Okay, this is an important one, an annual review. This is great for new grads. Probably my number one thing that I would encourage new grads to get put in to a offer letter or a contract is an annual review, specifically your first one. So think of your first year in practice as like a trial period. Is this guy or girl going to work out, or what's the deal? Are we going to do a good job? Are we going to be quick learners? Are we going to be great with patients? And I'm sure we will, but you have to show your employer that. But you got to prove yourself. I would say a new grad, sometimes, we've talked about this in other episodes too, sometimes new grads are a little bit hindered by being a new grad. And the salary discussion reflects that at times. So many times people will start with like a lower salary and they'll think, oh, this is ridiculous. And if you start low, when are you ever going to kind of break through? So the annual review is a great time to do that. So you can sit down, with the office manager or the supervising physician and review the past year. And hopefully you can get, a salary adjustment added into this. So after that year, you've proved yourself. You're solid. You're an A+ team member. You're great with patients. Your medical decision making is wonderful. You go above and beyond for your job all the time. So in exchange for that, and this annual review just creates a forum for you to discuss these things in. Hopefully with that, you can negotiate a salary adjustment. So if you do that when you're hired and say, listen, I'll accept that salary, but in a year, I want to sit down and talk about my performance. And if I meet your milestones, I would be eligible for a 10% raise, 10% of my base salary or something like that. And that's a big raise. Most cost of living raises that people could get are between 2 and 3%, or maybe even 1 and 3%. So a 10% raise is huge. But once you've proven yourself, then go for that. And then, you can take cost of living from there on out. Now, it doesn't have to be tied to money, though. So if they say, well, we're not going to do a salary adjustment, it's still good to have an annual review because you want to make sure that the practice is a good fit for you, and you want to make sure you're a good fit for the practice. And if you have to ask for this meeting, it's going to stress you out. I didn't negotiate this in my first job. And so when my year came up, somebody had told me in the process, like, oh, you should ask for a salary, bump after a year. There was no structured forum for me to talk to them about this. So it was super awkward. I was like, hey, can we sit down and talk about my performance? And they're like, you're doing great. And I was like, well, I know I'd like it to be a little bit more, structured than that. And then they kind of got like, oh, what's he going to ask for? So it was just a little awkward. And again, it doesn't have to be tied to salary, but just sit down, talk with them, and use that as an opportunity to say, hey, here's where I'm shining, and then be open to any sort of constructive criticism they have. If they say, you need to get your charts done a little faster, or you need to be, a little bit more patient with people on the phone, or whatever it might be, definitely be open to that too. But it's a great way for your professional development to grow, and it's a good forum to have those discussions. All right. So moving on, a couple other additions to put into an offer letter or a contract is, where does the malpractice insurance come from? Now, I don't want to get into this. Number one, malpractice insurance is super boring, but essential, and I'm not the expert on it. But there's basically two main types of malpractice insurance. There's occurrence coverage and claims made. Occurrence coverage covers any patient that you saw during a time period. So if you worked 2018 to 2020 at one job and then you moved on, and somebody that you saw during that time period files a lawsuit in 2021, you're covered. Clearly, the lawsuit would have to deal with, some care that you provided during that time period, or else you wouldn't be named in the lawsuit. So it is a great type of policy to have. They're getting a little bit more sparse in whether or not they're there. So the opposite of this would be claims made. So claims made covers you while you're working at the practice. But if you move on, like in my example, 2018 to 2020, you're covered while you work there. But if something's filed in 2021, you're not covered with claims made insurance, or malpractice insurance. Now, the reason that people go for this is it's a lot cheaper. So you definitely need to check and see what kind of malpractice you've got. A lot of people would recommend that you have your own in addition to whatever's provided by the practice. Now, I know what you're thinking, like right out of school, you got school debt, you're finally going to get paid for this job, and the last thing you want to do is throw it at insurance. So I get it. I mean, definitely look at what's offered to you. And then one key phrase here that I want you to remember is if you ever leave a job and you have claims made malpractice insurance, you need tail coverage. Tail coverage is like an extra little policy you put on the end of a claims made policy after you leave that covers anything that comes in kind of at the tail end of your coverage. Now, I, again, am not the expert on this. The AAPA has a great malpractice insurance page, and then they also offer coverage through the AAPA. So definitely check that out. I will link it in the show notes, pastartup.co/episode 11. So just a word to the wise, if you do get your own malpractice insurance, see if you can get the same amount of coverage as your supervising physician. And if you don't know what they've got, or they ask you what you should have, my sources that I looked up said $1 million per occurrence and $3 million aggregate. So $1 million, $3 million. Okay, so that's about it. Sorry to bore you to death. We'll move on from that. But those are good ones. So malpractice insurance, annual review, mileage reimbursement, those are great additions to your offer letter. Okay, a couple other things. Other items to consider would be look for a non-compete clause. So a non-compete clause is a clause that's put in a contract, usually a contract. It's not usually in an offer letter, but a contract that would restrict an employee after they leave the job from working for a competing business for a period of time. So it might say, you may not work, in dermatology for 2 years after you leave. Now that'd be pretty restrictive. But here's the deal. It cannot be for anything other than what you're in. I mean, it can be any, they could say you can't work as a physician assistant within 50 miles of this facility for 2 years after you leave here. Do not sign that. Okay. PAs switch jobs pretty often. So get it as limited as possible if it's in there. So negotiate that down to say, okay, I won't work in the same specialty as you for a year. That just prevents you from, let's say you are working dermatology, from going across the street to the competitor and working for them and maybe sharing trade secrets or something like that. But if you're working dermatology and you want to go work ER, there's no reason that they would have a problem with that. So make sure it's specific to just your specialty. Now, this would be something that I would be great omitting from anything, because if there's no written non-compete clause that you signed, then there's really no way to enforce it. And that's for your protection, because if you want to go work a dermatology practice across town, your buddy's working there, they pay more, the hours are better, something like that, and that's your sweet spot, you love derm, well, then I want you to be able to go do it. So if they leave it out, don't ask for it to be put in by any means. So if it's there, make it as limited as possible. Try to restrict it to your specialty and for as short of amount of time as possible. That just leaves you the most options. Now, the other thing to either put in if it's positive or leave out if it's negative would be moonlighting. So moonlighting is very common. That's where a PA would work, or actually anyone would work one job during the week, or like their normal job, quote unquote, but then will pick up extra hours somewhere else. So these are common with like urgent care, a quick care clinic like in the grocery store, or even like a previous shift position from a previous job. So let's say you worked for a hospitalist group and you went over to cardiology, and now on the weekends you pick up a shift for the hospitalists. So it's technically moonlighting. It's not really competition because it's a different specialty. But if they want to put it in there that moonlighting's fine, great, let them put it in there. That protects you so that there's no questions about it. But if they're going to give you a hard time about moonlighting, it's okay for them to leave it off, because again, if it's not written in something, a legal document that you signed, it's a little bit harder to enforce. Now they could say, ethically, we don't want you doing this. And if that's the case, then, that's up to you. It can be a threat to your current position under probably 2 criteria. Otherwise, I believe, it's my opinion, that it should be unrestricted, that you should be able to do whatever you want to do with your degree. However, if you're working like an overnight shift before your regular job, that's a no-no, okay? So if you got to be at your normal job at 8 a.m. and you work 7 p.m. to 7 a.m. all night at this moonlighting position, well, that is affecting your job because you're tired, you're cranky, you're worn out. That's no good. The other way that it could be a threat to your current position is if it's with a direct competitor, like in the same town. Now, honestly speaking, if you worked, and you can pick anything, you worked in an ER, you worked for a general surgeon, you worked family practice or something like that, it really doesn't threaten anything with the direct competitor. It kind of dilutes the brand, so to speak. And I'm doing air quotes. I wish you could see me because they're awesome. They look great. But a lot of times administration will say, we want you to be affiliated with our practice. And if you go to a different place that's doing the exact same thing, that's going to make people wonder why you're not happy at your job or why you're looking for something. So it is kind of best to maybe get a little bit further away from your specialty than the exact same thing. So if you do family practice, urgent care is fine. That's an urgent sort of thing or emergency medicine or something. But if you're working general surgery, you probably shouldn't go work for a different general surgeon across town. That just gets things a little bit confusing. So if it's not listed, there might be a soft policy about it, like it's not a written policy, but they have very strong feelings about it. I would ask the other PAs in the practice, if there are some, just say, hey, what's the moonlighting situation? And I wouldn't ask it right away, but don't be afraid to ask it eventually, because I think it's, you went to school, you got your degree, you're qualified. So by all means, you should not be afraid to use your skills for your benefit. But take it by case basis. You don't want to ruffle any feathers and things. So, so there you go. All right. I'm going to end it there, gang. Contracts are just not the most fun things to talk about, but they are a necessary evil. So it's important to kind of understand the difference between, we talked about contracts versus offer letters, the types of things that you should be having included, definitely, the other things that you can potentially include. So CME is big, cell phone coverage is big, mileage reimbursement can be big. That annual review, guys, that is so important. It provides such a great forum for you to talk about your strengths, support your first year learning, and now I'm up to speed, so I should be eligible for a raise. That can help you financially, but really, it'll also help your growth without the money, like we talked about. If there's no salary adjustment, it's still a good time to sit down each year and say, okay, what's working, what's not working, because ultimately our goal is to go to work, have a good experience, and then come home. And if we're not having a good experience at work, it can be frustrating. So, all right, gang. Well, show notes for this will be at pastartup.co/episode 11. Again, if you want to check out that Audible trial, pastartup.co/audible, AUDIBLE. That is 1 free month of audible.com. You get a free book with that. And then if you cancel it before 30 days, you're never charged a penny. You get to save that book, get to keep that book. But if you're like me, you might find that you really like it and you might hold on to it. So definitely check that out. I would love it. Again, I get a couple bucks and that would help keep us going. Hit us up on Twitter at PAStartupDOTCo. And head over to the website, pastartup.co, sign up for our mailing list. We'll send you some updates and things as they come out. And otherwise, all's well. So hope things are going well for you guys. And thank you so much for your time. And we'll catch you in episode 12.
Dad.
Yeah, Paisley.
I think the Wi-Fi is not working, and I really need to look at my snaps, so can you fix it?
Oh, your Snapchat's not working?
Yeah.
And that's a problem?
Yeah.
How big of a problem?
Like, really big, like urgent.
It's urgent. All right, I'm going to go work on the Wi-Fi and the Snapchat.